Today I'm going to talk about the uses and gratifications theory. Often we might have heard about how powerful the media is. Now, that was a concept that we had in the early 1920s, where the audience were expected to be powerless, passive consumers of media content. Media was supposed to be extremely powerful, and we did not even give any agency, or we did not regard the audience as having any power to resist those messages or even negotiate those messages. So that is when we had the idea of what is known as the mass society theory, that the average people, they are helpless victims of powerful media. The media are extremely powerful. They decide or they can convince people to do certain things or not do certain things. And that was an idea that was in the early stages of media studies. We know now that it's not true, but that is how the concept of mass society began, where we regarded audience as a homogeneous mass that consumes content in an uncritical and superficial manner. So whatever content is given out to them, they passively, uncritically, superficially consume that content. And the audience also does not engage with the media content. They are absorbing those content without much critical analysis. In other words, the audience was supposed to be passive. And the media effects were unidirectional. The direction of the impact was from the media to the masses, and it was extremely powerful. And they could kind of influence people's views and their behaviors as well. So that in a nutshell was how media was supposed to be in the mass society conceptualization. But we will see that no, of course, the audience has power, the audience has agency, and that is the crux of the uses and gratifications theory. And we know that this idea of the mass society is of course an oversimplification, because this does not regard the complex ways in which audience members use, consume, and make sense of media messages. So there are complex ways of making sense of those media messages. For example, in the early 1990s or even the 1980s, a lot of people would watch English news, not just for the content, but also to learn to speak in English. So people who were learning spoken English, they were advised to listen to English news. So the news had some other intent, but people were using it for some other intent. So that is where this how people or how the audience use those messages is extremely important. It's not simple. It's not always in a unidirectional matter, and it's complex and a lot more sophisticated. And that's what we're going to discuss in today's discussion on uses and gratifications theory. There's also an understanding, and that's important before we begin this discussion on the uses and gratifications theory, is the understanding that the media impact cannot always be powerful, or it cannot be always in a certain dimension. We have different perspectives of how powerful the media is, or what could be media's impact as well. So we have the individual differences perspective, and that basically talks about that that the media has different impact on different people. So for people who are more intelligent, the media may be a little, or it's an oversimplification. But people with a certain kind of intelligence and with a certain kind of self-esteem, they might be impacted by a media more than people who have another level of intelligence or self-esteem. So this impact of the media is not on all the audience members as a homogeneous unit, but it impacts different people differently. And that's a very important understanding, that people do not consume media in a similar manner, and they also do not react to media messages in a similar manner. And then we also have this social categories model, and it views the media's power being limited by audience members' associations and group affiliations. So the media is not extremely powerful to a person, or the media has limited impact for a person who belongs to a certain group, or who has stronger affiliations to a particular political party or a group for that matter. So they are more likely to engage in conversations or engage in communication which comes from the group rather than the media. So we have these perspectives that we must be mindful of when we talk of strong impact of the media. We know that this impact can be very limited as well. So during the 1970s, we had this kind of scholarly consensus that people's active use of the media may be an important mediating factor, and that's an important factor which makes media effects more powerful or less powerful. So if I'm dependent on media for certain gratifications, then the impact of the media will be more powerful. If I'm not dependent on the media only for certain gratification, then the impact of the media will be less powerful. So that's very important to understand, that the media is not always equally powerful, or the media does not have the same kind of impact for all the different audience members. This impact can be very different for different audience members. And this is because a lot of initial research was about the unintended negative effects of the media. And that's why we had this concept of media being all powerful and trying to influence people, because much of this was due to the kind of perceived negative influence of the media. We know that it's not always negative. This influence can be extremely positive also at times. One of the reasons why we started talking in terms of this difference in needs of the audience members is because we had access to new survey research methods and even data analysis techniques, which allowed us to study and interpret what uses the audience members were drawing from the media, and what were the gratifications they were getting from this uses. And that's important, because these techniques or these empirical methods of finding out these uses and gratifications did not exist earlier. Since we had these techniques now, we could more safely say that, okay, it is the audience member who decides that I will put this particular media to this particular use, and that's important. So we have what is known as the active audience. So the audience is not a passive, powerless consumer. He is an active entity. So he decides what utility he or she will draw from the media. So in the example of the English news, I said the utility that he or she draws is how to learn the English language, for example. The second important activity that an audience member exercises is the concept of intentionality. Whether I'm intentionally consuming that media or whether I'm just consuming it more superficially. So this intentionality is another level of activity of the audience members. Then we have the concept of selectivity. I decide to watch this particular channel. I decide to watch this particular movie or this particular web series, or to listen to a particular podcast and not to listen to other podcasts. So this question of selectivity is extremely important. It is a decision that I consciously make. I might decide not to watch a particular serial. Somebody else in my family would be watching that serial. I do not like it. So that selectivity is always there. And another important element of this activity, or an element of the active audience, is imperviousness to influence. I might not be influenced by media. There is a persuasive message. I can understand that the media is trying to persuade me, and I decide not to be persuaded. So that option or that activity in the audience is there. So the active audience concept is a very important concept to understand the impact of the media. It is about utility, what utility people make of the media content. It's about intentionality, whether they're intentionally willing to be drawn into debates which support the contentions that they already have. It's about selectivity, and it's about being impervious to influence. And in this context, I would want you to just have a very quick look at this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I'm sure many of you must have heard about that. And this is also a very important thing to understand, that different individuals have different psychological needs. So for example, everybody has these physiological needs, which is at the base of the Maslow's pyramid. And then once those physiological needs are satisfied, we go for safety needs. We require security, we require safety. And then once those safety needs have been satisfied, we go for what is known as the social needs. The need for belongingness, the need for being liked by people, the need for having friends. And then once that particular need has been satisfied, we go for what is known as the esteem needs. Now I want to feel that I have arrived. So I want to have that feeling of accomplishment. So starting from physiological needs to security needs to the social needs, and then esteem needs, and finally the self-actualization needs. So these needs are there in a hierarchy, and similarly when people use media, they decide to put media to certain uses. So time for a very quick quiz. Average people are helpless victims of powerful mass media. This is a statement of which theory? Is it A, limited effects theory? Is it the direct effect theory? Is it C, mass society theory? Or is it D, active audience theory? And I'm sure you know that the answer is the mass society theory. People consume media messages for all sorts of reasons. So I just gave you the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's about general people and their needs as going from the physiological to the self-actualization. Similarly, different people consume media content for different reasons. But the important thing to understand is that the driving need for using media is need gratification. I might be wanting information. I might be wanting confirmation for things that I already believe in. I might be looking for entertainment. I might be looking to connect with similar-minded people. So everybody consumes media for some kind of a need gratification. And the effect of a given message is unlikely to be the same for everyone. Someone who's trying to engage with a news bulletin only to understand the English language, he will be impacted less by somebody who's intentionally watching that particular news bulletin to know information about a particular issue. So he might have a greater impact of the media. So by understanding the particular needs of media consumers, the reason for media consumption becomes clear. So this is very important. We have to conceive, or we have to look at the audience as an active entity. And that is very important, that the audience are not passive consumers, they are not always powerless, but they are actively selecting, they are actively engaging with content, and they are actually looking for a need gratification. So that is a very important part of mass media use, that it is goal directed most often. We have a particular goal in mind when we are reading a newspaper, or when we are watching when we are listening to a podcast, for example. So people actively seek out specific media and specific content to generate specific gratifications. So I might be watching that particular channel at that moment of time because I want certain kind of information which I think is available in that channel. So that is very important. The person, the audience actively seeks out that specific media and specific content to generate specific gratifications. So that's important. The theorists in the Uses and Gratifications school, they view people as active. And that is what allows them to examine the various types of media that a particular person is using, and they want to establish what are the communication goals that this particular person might have in using that media. So the study of how media affect people must take into account the fact that people deliberately use media for particular purposes. And I might be watching that channel only because I want to satisfy a certain need. So I want to watch a particular sports channel, not because I want to enjoy all the sports, but I only want to see cricket matches, and I want cricket matches in which I want my team to do well. And that's important. So that is where this engagement happens, because I want to satisfy a particular need by using that particular channel. So the deliberate choices people make in using media are based on the gratifications they seek from the media. And that's very important. So we are using media deliberately because we seek certain gratifications from that media. And that is why this concept of uses, because I'm intentionally selecting and using a particular content of that particular channel, and I want to get a certain gratification from that content and that channel. So that is why this concept of uses and gratifications are inextricably linked. They are linked to each other. They are not separate. And another important thing to remember is that media is one of the many activities that you can choose from. You are deciding not to read a book, you are deciding not to go out and play, you are deciding not to engage in a telephonic conversation with a friend, you decide not to have coffee with a friend in a nearby coffee shop, you decide to watch media at that particular time. And that's very important. Media is competing with other activities. You had the choice of doing those activities. You are not indulging in those activities. You are indulging in media content. And that's very important. And that's why this question of intentionality is there. And the question of the media being powerful, or the question of media providing you the gratification, because you're actively seeking out that gratification. Instead of going out with a friend and having coffee, you decide to sit and watch your favorite serial because you want that gratification of where the story is going. So for you, this gratification or this knowledge that where the story is going, what is happening to the protagonist that I so closely associate with, for me that is more important than going out with a friend. That is why I am using this media content and I want to get a particular gratification out of it. So this idea that the media is not always the center, there are so many other activities and you actively decide to use media for that particular activity. And one of the assumptions, a very important assumption of the uses and gratifications theory, is that people are aware of their own media use, or of their own interests, or they're aware of their own motives. And that's very important, that I am using a particular media content because I want to use it for this particular thing, or I know what my interests are. So it is not some kind of a hidden force which is taking me there. It is about what I decide to do for myself. And I'm not only aware of my media use, interests, and motives, but I can also provide researchers in the uses and gratifications tradition the accurate picture of why I'm using it and not using it. So it's important for researchers not to have any kind of value judgments when it comes to linking a particular objective with how the audience member consumes a media content. For example, often people assume that, okay, since he's watching television A, he must be a supporter of political party B. So that kind of a judgment must not always be there. This is important for researchers to remember. So time for a quiz now. One assumption of uses and gratifications theory is A, media affect different people differently. B, media affect everyone similarly. C, there is no media effect. D, media is very powerful. If you answered A, you are correct. So we know that social situations can produce tensions and conflict. And very often people ease these tensions and conflict through media consumption. So that's very important, that our everyday life can lead to a lot of stress because of situations that we face in our working life or in everyday life, and we ease these stress and these pressures through media consumption. At the same time, social situations can create an awareness of the problems. So we know that a particular problem exists in society. For example, could be a loss of sleep, or it could be the question of not wearing masks in public spaces. So when these kind of problems come to the fore, the media performs the role of bringing these situations to public notice. So the information or awareness of the situation is brought to public notice by the media. Also, social situations require media or require audience members to use media as substitutes for real life situations that they cannot enjoy. For example, somebody might not be able to go to Kashmir more regularly to enjoy the wonderful weather or the scenery there, and the media acts as a substitute, providing those experiences for people who could not be enjoying holidays in those scenic land. So that's how media can have different kinds of uses for different kinds of people. Also, there's the social situations or the everyday life might lead you to have certain specific values, or you might develop certain values, or you might have certain kind of affinity for certain norms, and reaffirmation of those values through mass media content is very important. So very often we consume media not to know new things. Often we consume media to get a reconfirmation of things that I already believe in. So I already am having a certain kind of a lifestyle, and I use media content just to get a reconfirmation of the things that I already believe in, and that's very important. So that is another use that we can put the media to. Another very important thing is that media provides us with what is familiar and what is not familiar. So it tells us that these are the norms that we must follow if we are to be accepted in society. So these expectations of familiarity, that or these expectations of what you are expected to, how you are expected to behave in real life, is made a lot easier if you are very familiar with the media content. If you've been watching media content regularly, you know what is the in thing, you know what is expected of you, and you can react accordingly to the social situations that you come across. So we can now talk about a typology of uses and gratifications, that what are the kind of uses that we can put media through. So one of the important uses is passing time. You have a lot of time and you want to pass it well enough, especially on a holiday or on a weekend or on a long vacation. So you use media content to watch a lot of films, or you watch comedy, or you watch sports, or things that you like. It's also about companionship. Often media is a friend. Television or your radio at different points of time, or even a newspaper is your friend. It also helps you escape from the daily drudgery of life. So it provides you with a very important escape. You are immersed in a different world when you're consuming media, or you're in watching a very powerful movie. You are there in that particular world. For that moment, you can escape from your everyday drudgery. It's also enjoyment. It provides a lot of enjoyment. So there are a lot of these comedy series that people keep on watching again and again every day to get this enjoyment. It's also about social interaction. So for example, when I see those huge crowds in that Durga Puja Pandal or whatever on the screen, it provides me with some kind of vicarious social interaction. I can kind of see what my fellow citizens are doing and how they're enjoying. So that is a kind of an interaction. And it's also about relaxation. So a lot of these things might feel similar, but these are different intensities of uses. So it can provide me with relaxation as well. The content can also provide me with information. So we can use media for information. We can also use media for excitement. So these are the some of the uses that we can think about when we use media. So for example, one of the needs could be cognitive. So those cognitive needs can be supplied by media. So what are cognitive needs? Cognitive needs are about acquiring information, acquiring knowledge, or comprehending certain things. The need could also be about affective. So affective is about emotions. So I would want to have certain emotional experiences. I feel happy, so I want to see that happiness on the media screen or through the content that I'm consuming. So that affective need is also supplied by the media. So it could be a pleasant or an aesthetic experience, for example. It could also be an integrative experience. So the need is an integrative need, and that need can be supplied by the media as well. We can also have the need of tension release being supplied by the media. So when we are trying to escape from situations, or when I'm in an off mood and I want to use media for relaxation or diversion, so the need is the tension release, and I'm getting use of media for that. So let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the uses and gratifications theory quickly. So the uses and gratifications theory focuses attention on individuals. Its attention is on the individual. It respects the intellect and ability of media consumers. It provides an insightful analysis of how different people experience media content. It differentiates between active users of media and the passive users of media. It studies media as a part of everyday social interaction. And it also provides an insight into why people adopt new media. For example, why people adopt a certain kind of OTT content. It is because of the uses and the gratifications that they draw from this. Now, there are certain weaknesses of this theory also. So often it is associated with functionalism, and this might lead to some kind of a status quo in the media. It does not address the presence or absence of effects. It does not talk of effects as much as it should. Many of its key concepts, the concepts of affective and all those things that I just spoke of, they're unmeasurable. They cannot be measured. It is too oriented at the micro level, at the level of the audience. It does not talk about the macro or the structural levels. And often media gratifications are not the same as media effects. So these are some of the weaknesses of uses and gratifications. So the uses and gratifications research basically studies the social and psychological origins of needs which generate expectations of mass media or other sources, which lead to different patterns of media exposure, which in turn leads to need gratification and other consequences which are often unintended ones. So there are these 7 levels of research in uses and gratifications theory. Time for a quiz now. Acquiring information satisfy which needs? Is it A, affective needs? Is it B, cognitive needs? Is it C, integrative needs? Or is it D, tension release? I'm sure you know this is cognitive needs, B. Thank you very much.